Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Well, many experts are saying it, and that is that we can have, after the opening up of the lockdowns, an eventual round 2 of Corona. And we're going to talk today on the show on how to prepare for round 2. What's the Boy Scout saying? Be prepared? That's the best way. So we're going to be talking today on the show with a former American prepper. Remember those? There was a reality show where they would go into people's basements and homes, and you would see people who are preparing for the apocalypse. They're preparing for the terrible, terrible emergency that might happen. And this man was interviewed on one of those shows, very interesting. So I turned to him because who knows better than a prepper how to prepare, right? What do we need in case of a round 2, which would mean another lockdown? And experts are saying, the government officials were saying that if we go to a round 2, I hope we don't, but if we do, they say it's going to be worse than the first one. So I'm still scratching my head on that one, trying to figure out why. But he's going to be talking to us on how to prepare for a second round of Corona. He's also going to be talking and focusing in the second part on the Jewish people and why it's important to make Aliyah to Israel, like he did, by the way. And he's going to explain what we can see happening even now with the hit to the world's economy. And I say world because the entire world is suffering from this pandemic. Even with this first round and the huge hit we took, there are already food shortages, there's already some panic, and there's already finger pointing. This leads to danger as well, and even countries that could, God forbid, go to war. We'll see what happens. We'll be right back.
G'day, I'm Jono Vandor.
And I'm Ross Nichols.
Join us on our program, Israel on My Mind, a show that broadcasts all the weekly goodness that flows like milk and honey from the Holy Land straight into your ears with humorous and happy news stories.
New shows are posted every Thursday at 7 p.m. Israel time, highlighting the lighter side and advancing a positive view of Israel here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Be biblical.
Be beautiful.
Wear your crown.
Wrapping is my crown.
Do what married Jewish women have been doing for thousands of years. Celebrate the art of head wrapping. I'm Andrea Grinberg from Rapunzel.com. We have beautiful scarves, stunning accessories, scarves for faith, scarves for healing, and scarves for fun. Rapunzel.com. That's Rapunzel with a W. Or click on our banner on the Israel News Talk Radio homepage.
Rapunzel.com. Beautiful scarves, stunning accessories paired with tutorials, support, and a vibrant community to give you everything you need to start and perfect your head covering journey.
Don't forget, join the Rapunzel community group on Facebook to see, learn, and share your beautiful wraps. That's Rapunzel with a W on Facebook.
I love Rapunzel.
I love Rapunzel.
I love Rapunzel.
Get 10% off your purchase with promo code RADIO. Go now to Rapunzel.com.
How to prepare for a round 2 of the coronavirus, if it should come. And we're going to be speaking with a former American prepper. He knows how to prepare. Must have been a Boy Scout when he was younger. We're also going to be talking about Aliyah, specifically for the Jewish people, what the after effects of the coronavirus could be, the expectations that there may be a big surge in Aliyah within the next several months as the economy gets a huge hit and people are forced to reevaluate what they're going to do in life. Maybe they've, God forbid, lost their jobs, their businesses, or just things have changed and they feel that some type of change has to happen as well. Our guest today is Josh Wander. He is the founder of the Bring Them Home organization. You can find him on Facebook and and on YouTube, and he always is pushing for Aliyah, which I do as well, which many of my friends do, because we so believe in Aliyah, which means literally to rise up, to go up, because when a Jew moves to Israel, it's as if he is spiritually going up. And even interesting, when you're coming from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, even though Tel Aviv is a bit north of Jerusalem, you always say you're going up to Jerusalem because this is the spiritual center of the world. All right, so with no further ado, let's introduce our guest, Josh Wander.
Tamar, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming on. And you are a former prepper. I remember seeing the episode of, I think it was called American Preppers. It was by, if I'm not mistaken, National Geographic put it out. Excuse me. And we saw how you were preparing. And I'm thinking now that the first round is pretty much winding down, at least here in Israel, and the lockdown has been opened up. In fact, this morning on the news, due to the heat wave that we're having here in Israel, they have now come out and said that no one has to wear masks anymore for the next week because of the heat wave. And that includes children going to school as well. No more masks this week until they enter the heat wave. But since they're letting us out now, and more, the economy is opening up, stores are opening up, et cetera, this is a window of opportunity for all of us to be able to go and restock just in case, God forbid, there's a round two. Where would you like to start?
Well, first of all, Tamar, I was a Boy Scout. And just like when you're once a Boy Scout, always a Boy Scout. So likewise, once a prepper, always a prepper. So I wouldn't put it in my past tense. I continue to be a prepper.
Okay.
And I think and the show was called Doomsday Preppers. Which
right.
You've seen on Netflix and whatever. You can still watch it. I would start with the fact that there are a lot of signs pointing to a second wave. That's first of all. So even if things are getting better, which is not clear that it is, but even if they are getting better, even if they do discover a vaccine in the near future, hopefully, that does not mean that there will not be in the fall a second wave, which potentially could be a lot worse than what we have seen until now. We are very fortunate here in Israel that even though we complain a lot about it, numbers-wise, I consider it to be borderline miraculous that numbers-wise, what we're seeing here in the entire Corona era is nothing compared to one day in New York City. And this is after we had the festival of Purim, and everybody was hugging and kissing and running around, and if it wasn't miraculous, I mean, if it went according to nature, we should have equal, if not large, higher numbers than what we're seeing in the United States and China and in Europe. But it's borderline miraculous what's happening here. But that's not to say that we shouldn't be prepared. We shouldn't be careful, because there's a high potential for a second wave.
Okay, so now that we have this window of opportunity where the stores are opening now, people are going out, we don't even have to wear masks now. The government is saying, what should we be doing?
So first of all, when you say we don't have to wear masks, you're speaking about the obligation, the legal obligation. I still wear a mask, and I think it's very important to wear a mask. I'm still distancing myself, even though there are many people that are returning to their synagogues and to their places of work. I'm still trying to, as much as possible, distance myself because I think that, like I said, I'm convinced that there is a potential for a very serious second wave. That having been said, there are a lot of steps that can be taken. And, prepping in general is really like in the Matrix, taking the red pill and it's going down a rabbit hole. Because there is so much to learn, and I've emphasized, I think, before on your show, and I'll emphasize it again, that much more important than going out and buying stuff is learning the skills, spending, a lot of us are still home, we're not working. We have an opportunity to spend quality time on YouTube. There is so many skills that one can learn now, which are equally important, if not more important, than going out and buying stuff. I mean, you can have all the preps in the world, but if push comes to shove and you don't know how to use them, then they're really not very useful.
What is them? Like what? You mean what skills?
I'll give you an example. I mean, there are many aspects, and we've discussed it before, of prepping. One of them is obviously is preparing with specific foods, long-term storage foods and water, having a gas mask or some sort of air filtration, having communications, having some sort of defense system. All these things, right? If you have, let's say, I know people like that go out and they buy these 5-gallon buckets of whole wheat. That's long-term storage. I don't know if you know, but they actually found kernels of wheat in the pyramids that were thousands of years old, and they were able to make them sprout after thousands of years. So these are things that can last for, in the right conditions, thousands of years. And but if you don't know how to grind it and you don't know what to do, if you just used to going to the store and buying your flour in a bag, then you're not going to know what to do with this. Likewise, if you have the greatest, coolest ham radio that you went out and bought, if you're not licensed and you don't know the rules and you don't know how to use it, it's pretty much worthless. And it could be even dangerous when you're talking about defense systems. If a person goes out and purchases a firearm and is not skilled to use it, he can be a danger to himself and others. So all these things require a certain skill set, and it's very, very important not just to have the preps, but to know how to use them and to practice with them. We have, I have done with myself and my kids, my family, and in some cases even with community-wide, we have practiced different scenarios in which we would have to use our preps, and it's very, very important to get that together. One essential idea in prepping, and there's the prepper community is not organized. So for good or for bad, it's not organized. But it's important to understand that one cannot do it alone unless one is in this isolated bunker in the middle of I don't know where. One is going to need a community, a group of people that they can trust in the case of an emergency, and that community it's vital that they practice and they understand how to work together before things happen, because once things happen, I think that this was really a window of opportunity. The first wave that we've gone through really opened up a lot of people's eyes to the fact that one needs to be better prepared, because they realize how quickly something like this can overtake the world. And hopefully they're taking this opportunity now to go out and start learning more skills and getting more necessities that they'll need for a potential second wave or something else that'll happen in the future.
Okay, so looking at the last wave that we had, I guess the first thing that we should all be doing is to go running out to buy toilet paper. That was a joke.
Again, it probably depends on where you are. In Australia, that's a big thing. But here in Israel, I don't think that we had too much of a shortage of toilet paper. But toilet paper is definitely something important. I mean, having, hygiene, I understand you were joking, Tamar, but hygiene is very, very important in a disaster situation, because potential of disease in a disaster situation when everybody's isolated and closeted together is very, very high. And if somebody is really quarantined and isolated, completely isolated, and one has a situation in which they're, in a worst case scenario, let's say there's no electricity and there's no water, then you're talking about scenarios in which you're going to have to think about all sorts of hygienic situations, like what do you do with waste? I don't want to go get too graphic over here, but if you don't have a toilet that flushes, so what do you do with all that waste that you're going to accumulate? And there are preps actually to get ready for that. There are special enzymes that one can use and buckets in order to rid yourself of waste in a worst case scenario which you don't have a toilet.
Okay, so we're going to be going to a break in a minute, but I want to just run over again. You're saying to learn skills, learn about long-term food and water storage, masks or air filtration to take a look at, defense system. Do you own a firearm to protect your family? Communications. We have to talk about that if communication is cut. And we're going to take a look at some other things that we might be facing. Don't go anywhere, everybody. We'll be right back. And feel free to call into the show if you have any questions.
Hi, everyone. This is Andrea Simento from Jerusalem, inviting you to drop everything and join me on my show, Pull Up a Chair. We'll visit this week's quirky stories, meet fabulous guests, and discover my Israel. Together, we'll laugh, shout, and explain the topics that make us say, hey, we've got to talk about that. So get comfortable and pull up a chair with me, Andrea Simento, every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
and me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
All right, we are back here at the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, and we're speaking with a Doomsday prepper. He was interviewed on the National Geographic show called Doomsday Preppers, and he's here to talk to us about what happens if we go to a round 2 of the coronavirus. Right now, the sun is out. We're having a heat wave. The government has said that we can even walk around without masks for the next week because it's very difficult to do that in 40-degree weather. And when I say 40 degrees, I'm talking Celsius. That's very, very hot. It's over 100 degree Fahrenheit. And we're speaking with Josh Wander. He is the founder of the Bring Them Home organization. And you can call into the show if you have any questions about prepping, about what you should be buying, how we should be preparing, just in case there's a round 2, because the government has said, I've seen this in the headlines, that if we do go to a round 2, they are saying that it could be much worse than even what we experienced during round 1. All right, so getting back to what you were talking about, Josh, you were saying that we need to, number one, learn skills, because the world will be changed. The world will be different if, in fact, we get into a place where we're going to have to where we find ourselves in a doomsday scenario. We have to learn skills of how to protect ourselves, how to store food and water so our family doesn't go hungry, or we ourselves don't go hungry. Hygiene and first aid, to have that available for yourself as well, hygiene products. I want to talk to you about communication, because if communication towers go down for whatever reason, how do people communicate?
Great question. So a little known anecdote that happened during the 9/11 incident in New York. During 9/11, I don't know where you were, Tamar, but I was actually had a flight from JFK to Tel Aviv on 9/11, and I was supposed to be coming back, and obviously that all changed. At the time, I was an editor for the Jerusalem Post, and I was put on assignment there at Ground Zero. But a little known fact is that all the communications were downed, primarily because of just the overload of people trying to get online, speaking to people, trying to find out if their loved ones were okay. And it knocked out all the communications in New York and many other parts of the country. Now, a little known fact is that the communications also were knocked down between the Pentagon and the White House. Now, as you can imagine, that's a very, very vital route to have a communication, because the White House has to be instructing the Pentagon as to what the next step is going to be, and nobody knew what was going on. How they rectified this was an amazing story, is that there was someone that had a ham radio operator in the White House, and there was a ham radio operator, fortunately, also in the Pentagon, and they pulled out their ham radios and they communicated for 20 minutes, 20 critical minutes. They were able to communicate because they had no way, there was no, the communications were completely cut between the White House and the Pentagon. So ham radio saved the day. Now, ham radio is very, very important. Ham radio, people think that in this new day and age where we have internet and we have all sorts of technologies, ham radio is like telling somebody to go back to the rotary phone. For most people, they think this is going back to some ancient, archaic sort of
smoke
communication.
Signals and Morse code.
Exactly. And they don't realize that when the cell towers are down and when the communication, the internet has a problem, radio waves will continue to work, and ham radio takes a very, very central role in communication when everything else. In fact, in the United States, their ham radio operators often volunteer in disaster situations, and they step up and they start to communicate for all sorts of local governments, because in the case of 9/11, it was a national government, because they understand the necessity of having these open communications. Anyone is able to get a ham radio license in the that's before I go anywhere else. One needs to be licensed in order. You don't need a license in order to buy a ham radio, which is confusing for many people. You can go on Amazon and buy a ham radio, but you need to be licensed to operate, or at least to transmit off of a ham radio. You're able to listen. Anyone's able to listen, but you're not able to transmit unless you have a license. And they're very, very strict about this situation. Of course, in the case of
okay, Josh, just because of the time, I want to kind of like pull away from that a little bit. So you say people should look into getting ham radios, but let's look at more practical for because I'm not going to go out and buy a ham radio. I'm not going to go and get a license, and most of us are not going to do that. But maybe I was always in times of emergency, also because we've gone through wars here in Israel. I said we should have a central place where we check in. Whether it's your uncle in Chicago or wherever, this is where the one place, if something happens and we lose communication, that's the place where we're going to call and leave messages, or the one person who might be, in the safest place, that's the place where we should go. Also, just to have an alternative charging, phone charging system. I have, what I did do, and which was everybody can do, is just to go online and order a, I think it's called a Bag-In radio, something like that, where you could just wind up, or solar, or battery, etc., where there are emergency radios that also have a siren on it, that also have a emergency light, and also have a place where you can charge your phone if you're going to sit there and crank it, but it'll work if you're out of power. Do you want to mention comment on that?
Yeah, I mean that's great for listening to news. That's not so great for transmitting and communicating. When the phone lines are down, having a central location doesn't really help if you're not able to communicate with them. Again, ham radio, you can actually speak across the world. It's not just that people think that ham radio is just like those little walkie-talkies that you buy that you talk down the block. Today, ham radios, you're able to speak across the planet. So that is really the way to go, is to learn the skills, get licensed. It's not so difficult to get licensed. It's pretty easy, actually, especially in the United States. And you get your call sign, and you're up and going. You can do it within a week.
Maybe one person in each neighborhood, if they had that would be enough. That would be good enough. So let's move on now. What about what kind of food should we be buying? You talk about long-term food storage, but give us practical things: tuna, baked beans, milk that lasts a long time, or powdered milk. Like what?
So it depends on what you're preparing for. If you're preparing for short-term disasters, then canned foods are great. They can last up to a year. You have to rotate them. But they'll last for a year, and as long as the can is not bulging, you're keeping it in the right conditions. Canned foods could be a great storage. But if you're talking, when I say long term, I mean decades. I don't mean just for a year.
Okay.
And if you're talking decades, then canned foods is not something that you want to go with, because it eventually does go bad.
Okay.
And so you're looking for things that can be sealed up and can be kept long term. Dried milk is one of the options you mentioned. You could talk about all sorts of different grains. You could talk about salts. You could this is again a rabbit's hole. So we can have multiple shows discussing these different ideas. But before you get to food, you have to speak about water, because water is much more essential than food on the chain of things. And having access to water is absolutely, even if it's not a heat wave, it's absolutely vital. A person can only survive a couple of days without water. You can go a month without food.
Josh, I want to jump ahead because we only have 2 more minutes to this segment here. I want to talk about mental health. A lot of people are suffering because they're isolated. What do you have to say about that?
I'm not a mental health worker, but I can say that someone who is prepared, who has thought about these things in advance, has a much, much better, a better chance of being stable when something happens. Right? If you've already planned this out in your head, and when it happens, and this is something you learn in the military, and it's drilled into you, that once you prepare something over and over again, there's something called muscle memory, and there's scenarios that have already been planned out. And even if it doesn't work out exactly the scenario you're saying, and I have to make that point, Tamar, that people should not prepare for a specific disaster, because we don't know exactly what's happening. When you prepare broadly for many disasters, and many of these things that we've discussed already are things that are applicable to any type of disaster, not just a second wave of corona.
Okay, and so we're going to be going to another break now, but when we get back for this last segment, we're going to be talking about what we might see in the future, especially if there's a second wave, and it is worse. We're looking at food shortages already today. I go to the grocery store. I've been there twice already, and there are things that are out of stock. We're going to see people who have lost their jobs, lost their businesses, people who took a huge financial hit, and we're going to see after that finger pointing. We're already seeing finger pointing, and of course the blame game. And violence often happens when people get into a very tense situation like this, where they don't know where they're going to be able to pay their rent, whether they're going to be able to put food on their table. Violence often happens. You see revolutions in countries. And in fact, when I'm talking about countries, if their economies are hit hard enough, you might even see, God forbid, wars, because they want China, perhaps, or some other entity to pay for the losses that they've taken. So all of this coming up, and what Jews might want to do, especially when we see these blame games, it's often fingers are pointed. It's the Jews. We're already seeing this in the media, that the Jews knew about this, and they have the vaccines, and they're waiting to give out their vaccines so they can get even more money for it. All these terrible things. Anyway, we'll be right back.
Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
We live in the age of information, but not inspiration. If you're like me, you're looking to be inspired to reach higher, to connect more, and to grow. Well, if you want to get warm, you need to stand close to the fire. And if you want to catch fire, you need to stand close enough to get hit by the sparks. Join me, Penina Taylor, as we walk with people who have embarked on a spiritual journey towards Torah. We'll uncover what started them on their journey and what truths they discovered along the way. So prepare to be inspired as we take a leap of faith every Sunday at 5 p.m. on Israel News Talk Radio.
All right, we are listening, we are speaking with a former Doomsday prepper, Josh Wander. Actually, he's not a former. He says he's always prepared. He always tries to be prepared. He's a Boy Scout, and he lives by that rule, be prepared. And we're talking about what to do, how to prepare for a possible round 2 of the coronavirus. And we spoke about some of the things that we might be seeing in the future with the loss of jobs and employment and people losing their businesses, food shortages, which we're already seeing today, hits on the economy, not just in your country, but around the world. And this often is followed by violence when there are food shortages, lack of work, unemployment, lack of money. There comes the finger pointing and blame game. And I was discussing with our guest, Josh Wander, who is the founder of the Bring Them Home organization, that American Jews and Jews in Europe, they're living on borrowed time, because when things get bad, too often fingers are pointed at the Jews, and they're already saying, a lot of conspiracy theorists, that this is the Jews' fault and that Israel knew about this or invented it even, and that we already have the vaccine, but we're holding out because we want to get as much profit and money as possible before we release some vaccine. Crazy stuff. Josh, what do you have to say about all of this?
Well, I think that it's really essential, Tamar, to look at history and to understand the trends of how things work and what's happening today. I mean, the economy in the United States is in beginning its death spiral. There is no way that it is sustainable to just print unlimited amounts, and this is what the Fed says in the United States. They're printing unlimited amounts of currencies. That leads, as we can look throughout history, to what is known as hyperinflation. The dollar will be worthless if they continue to print unlimited amounts of currencies. And that is just one of many. The anti-Semitism that leads to anti-Semitism. There's anti-Semitism before. I shouldn't say that's the only reason for it. There was anti-Semitism before. But of course, as you correctly pointed out, people are going to point fingers. And the fact that you have in the United States today many of key players that are Jewish, that are well known to be Jewish. You have the Secretary of Treasury. They just appointed a member of the Chabad Hasidic sect to be the Undersecretary of Treasury.
Josh, we're losing you a little bit. If you can stand a little bit closer to a modem or wherever you're getting your internet from.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So the Undersecretary of Treasury is a Chabad Hasidic man that they just appointed. You have, of course, Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. You know, Jews are all through the current administration, and they will be the first ones that the fingers will be pointed to if there is a financial collapse. And it's unfortunate, and I think that this is a window of opportunity for Jews in the United States and around the world to wake up and say, you know, Corona, anti-Semitism, the financial collapse, this is the time, if no other time, this is the time that we have to get up and we have to go home. And that's the idea of our organization, Bring Them Home, is to educate and to encourage Jews around the world to come home. This is an essential part, not only for their well-being, but for the well-being of the world. We believe that this is the redemptive process that we're in today, and that what has happened is it's absolutely vital to get all the Jews back home, and we are pushing very, very hard for that. I don't know if you want to plug now or plug later the sites, but everybody should go to the sites and see exactly what we're doing. We have a very exciting thing. We're now coming out with a new website. We're actually creating a song. A very well-known singer in the United States is going to be coming out with a song about bringing them home. We have all sorts of a new blog. We have all sorts of elements to the site, which hopefully will be. And we're going on a massive, very important. We're going on a massive media campaign within specifically the Orthodox community in America. We're going to be advertising in different magazines and different publications in order to, this is, I think, the first time this has ever happened, in order to encourage them to make Aliyah, to come home to Israel.
Okay, Josh, you and I were talking during the break that oftentimes when people panic because the situation gets so bad for whatever is ailing them, people freeze.
Yeah, there's a myth that people panic during a disaster situation or some sort of emergency, and often people have the opposite reaction. It's not panic, it's freezing. And I mentioned to you that that's exactly what happened, and why there were so many deaths during 9/11 is there were a lot of people that were in the Twin Towers, and when they heard what was going on, they just froze. They were in their offices, and they were waiting for someone to take charge and tell them what to do, and they just sat there, and as the buildings collapsed, they were just sitting in their offices. And this is something that I'm sure many of you listeners have experienced. If you're ever in a restaurant or in a movie theater, and all of a sudden there was a false alarm and a fire alarm went off, people just sit around and stare at each other and wait for something to happen. Hopefully it's not real. Hopefully and if it is real, hopefully there's someone that is able to take charge and able to move people, because it's much more common for people to freeze than to panic.
Okay, and so I want to just connect this with Jews who are living abroad, who are thinking, if things get bad, a lot of times what they'll do, instead of saying, I got to get out of this situation, I mean, like, if God, please, if it were that the Jews escaped Europe just before the Holocaust, but they didn't. A lot of people hunker down in times of an emergency, and that's not always the right thing to do, and especially for the Jews, they should be looking at this as a signal that they should be going home, that this is the time now to pick up, especially if you've, God forbid, lost your job, things are looking bad, to make a new start. And doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is the definition of insanity, they say. And so if Jews find themselves in a situation where things are getting very bad, this is an opportunity to be able to come and make Aliyah. And in fact, I understand that Israel is expecting a wave of Aliyah in the next several months. Is that true?
Yes, there have been reports that there's going to be 100,000 people making Aliyah. I'm a little bit doubtful. I'm hopeful, but doubtful. I do think that the Jews in America and around the world are very frozen in their track right now, and they don't know exactly what to do, and that's why we're trying to thaw them out and get them moving. But it's a horrible situation. I always say that the Jews of all people in the world should be the most prepared because of their tragic history. They're the ones that have been exiled and moved from country to country during inquisitions and pogroms. And we should be the most prepared. And unfortunately, I think we're of the least prepared people in the world. The Jews that are in America and in Europe, they're some of the least prepared people. They're people that are very dependent on the government and many times an economy, which, again, during a collapse, they're the first ones that are going to be targeted. I think that it's, I'm a big fan of cryptocurrencies. I believe that one should, not because I have anything against the U.S. dollar, I just think that the U.S. dollar is on its way down. That's a whole new subject in itself. But Jews have to prepare. Like we spoke about earlier, they need to prepare by having their passports. They need to prepare by having the means that if the economy collapses, how they're going to get out, how they're going to move, how they're going to defend themselves. These are all very, very, very important steps they need to take in order to prepare themselves for not only a second wave of Corona, but potentially a very, very dangerous ignition of anti-Semitism around the world.
All right. So, people, as you just said, that's a very good thing that you mentioned, that people should make sure that their passports are in order, that they're betokef. How do you say that in English? How do you say betokef in English? That they're valid, yes, and current and valid. Also, I always urge Jews to fill out forms at Nefesh B'Nefesh to make Aliyah, because you can't always make Aliyah at the snap of your fingers whenever you want. Sometimes you get caught in bureaucracy and things happen. You need a letter from here and you need proof of that and blah, blah, blah. And no one's going to put a gun to your head and force you to get on that plane. Fill out the forms, pick a date. If you can't do it, you can always cancel out and move your moving up, postpone it, but get it done.
Look at the wake-up call, Tamar, that we just had. Now only Israelis, people that have already had Israeli citizenship or are in the process of making Aliyah, or able to come to Israel. The gates are closed to tourists now. So if a Jew anywhere in the world, even though there is the right of return, wanted to come back to Israel, they can't right now. So this should be a wake-up call to Jews around the world that this is the time to start preparing for that.
Good point. All right, Josh, give out your website for anybody who wants to go find out more.
So it's bringthemhome.org.il. Bringthemhome.org.il. You can also hit me up on Facebook at Joshua Wander. On YouTube, we have Israel Torah. We have all sorts of information to educate people out there. If anybody has any questions, they're always welcome to reach out.
All right. And you can find Josh also. He's very active on Facebook as well. And again, go to his website. Check it out. Bringthemhome.org.il. They're going to be updating their website in the next few days. So if you go now, go back again in another few days, another week or so, and check them out, because they're going to have a whole new platform over there.
Subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's very important for us to get hits.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Josh Wander, prepper for Doomsday Prepper, thank you so much for giving us your knowledge and suggestions on what we can do to better weather a possible round 2 of Corona. Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure.
All right. Remember, everybody, bringthemhome.org.il and sign up. Also, subscribe to their YouTube channel. Thank you, everybody, for being with us, and stay safe. And if you're Jewish, check out Nefesh B'Nefesh, nbn.org.il.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
If you're hearing this message, everyone else can too. Advertise with Israel News Talk Radio and get your message out to people. We'll build a personalized package for you. Contact advertising at israelnewstalkradio.com.
Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey, this is Jake in Anchorage, Alaska, and I love listening to all the super interesting interviews and up-to-date information on what's happening in Israel.
Hello, this is Anna King, originally from London, now living in Israel. And what can I say? Israel News Talk Radio is my cup of tea.
My name is Bhaskar. I'm from India, and I love listening because you get to know the truth and wonderful voices from this lovely country.
Mom! Okay, wait a minute. Hi, this is Chava Dax, and I'm calling from the rolling hills of Ma'ale Adumim, just north of Jerusalem. I always listen to Israel News Talk Radio to get all the latest news and commentary and to keep me up to date every day.
This is Sarah Dax from Ma'ale Adumim, and I'm 12. I wish Israel News Talk Radio was boring so my mom wouldn't listen to it all the time. Mom!
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.